The silence in our home used to be a comfortable thing, a soft blanket woven from 15 years of shared history and mutual trust. Now it was a screaming void, a testament to everything that had been hollowed out from the inside. It all started the day my husband came home with the face of a man who had just seen his own ghost. He sat me down on our sofa, the one we'd picked out together, and took my hands. His were cold, clammy. He told me he was sick. He used a long, complicated medical term, something with too many syllables that sounded like it had been plucked from a medical drama. He said it was rare, aggressive, and worst of all, terminal. The word hung in the air between us, thick and suffocating, terminal, an ending. He told me the doctors had given him a year, maybe 18 months if the experimental treatments worked. My world, which had been a sturdy, well-built structure, crumbled into dust in that single moment. My first instinct was to fight, to research to find the best doctors to get second, third, and fourth opinions. But he was adamant. He'd already seen the top specialists, he claimed. They had all said the same thing. This was it. His only hope, he said, was a series of incredibly expensive, non-traditional treatments offered by a private clinic in Europe, treatments not covered by our insurance. He presented it not as a choice, but as our only path. He wept and I held him, my own tears soaking the shoulder of his shirt. I saw a man I loved, the man I had built my life with, facing his own mortality, and in that moment I would have done anything, sold anything, given anything to save him. His mother, my mother-in-law, arrived within the hour, her face a perfect mask of tragic grief. She held me, stroking my hair, murmuring about strength and courage. She was a formidable woman, always impeccably dressed, her emotions as carefully managed as her investment portfolio. I had always found her a little cold, a little too controlling, but in this crisis her steely resolve felt like a lifeline. She and my husband had always been unnervingly close, a tight two-person unit that I had orbited for years. Now their bond seemed to be a source of strength. She took charge of the logistics, her efficiency a stark contrast to my emotional paralysis. She spoke of liquidating assets, of freeing up capital. "We cannot let money be the object," she said, her voice firm, unwavering. "His life is priceless, your savings, your retirement accounts, they are just numbers. This is what you saved for, to save him." It made perfect sense. Of course, she was right. What was money compared to a few more months, a few more years with the man I loved? I had worked hard my entire life. I'd been a diligent saver, investing wisely, building a substantial nest egg for our future, a future that had just been given an expiration date. I handed over control without a second thought. I gave my husband power of attorney over my financial accounts so he could manage the medical expenses without bothering me with the details. I trusted him. I trusted them. The next few months were a blur of feigned bravery and mounting debt. The first wire transfer to the Swiss clinic drained my main savings account. The second, for a specialized course of medications, required me to sell a significant portion of my stock portfolio. He would have good days and bad days. On the good days, he was almost his old self, full of gallows humor and a desperate kind of affection. On the bad days, he was weak, listless, barely able to get out of bed. His mother was a constant presence, bringing home-made soups that he would barely touch and speaking in hushed tones about his deteriorating condition. She would hold my hand and tell me what a saint I was, how no man could ask for a more devoted wife. I felt like a fraud because all I felt was a terrifying, helpless fear. I sold my car. I cashed in my retirement fund, taking the massive tax penalty as a necessary evil. Our home, which I owned outright before we were married, was remortgaged. Every penny I had, every asset I had built through years of discipline and hard work, was funneled into the gaping maw of his illness. I was bleeding myself dry, and I was doing it willingly, gratefully, for the man I loved. The first crack in the narrative was almost imperceptible. He was supposed to be at home, recovering from a particularly grueling treatment cycle. I came home early from work to find him not in bed but in the garage, vigorously polishing his golf clubs. He looked healthy, his cheeks were flushed, his arms strong. When he saw me, he flinched, and a flicker of something, not pain but panic, crossed his face. He quickly adopted a pained expression, leaning against the workbench and pressing a hand to his stomach. "Just trying to feel normal for a minute," he gasped. "The doctor said a little light activity might help." I helped him back to bed, my heart aching for his brave front, but a tiny, dissonant note had been struck in the back of my mind. Then came the phone calls. He started taking them in the other room, his voice a low murmur. When I'd walk in, he'd hang up abruptly. "Just my mother," he'd say, "or a friend from work, didn't want to bother you." But his eyes were shifty. He guarded his phone like it was a state secret. One evening, he fell asleep on the sofa, his phone slipping from his hand onto the carpet. An impulse I couldn't explain made me pick it up. My hands trembled as I used his fingerprint to unlock it. I knew it was a violation of his privacy, but something inside me, a primal instinct for truth, screamed that I needed to look. I opened his messages. The recent texts were mostly from his mother, full of concerned inquiries and instructions, but as I scrolled down, I saw a name I didn't recognize, a woman's name. The message thread was long, stretching back months. I opened it, and my world tilted on its axis. The messages were filled with I love yous and I miss yous. They were planning a trip. There were photos of her, a beautiful woman with a bright smile, and photos of them together, laughing, dining, looking anything but like a man in the final stages of a terminal illness. And then I saw the message that stopped my heart. It was from him to her, sent just last week. The last of the money should be cleared soon. The old cow is selling the house. Then we're free, you, me, and a beach in Costa Rica. Forever. Attached was a picture of a real estate listing. A beautiful villa with an infinity pool. Below it, a message from his mother to him in a separate chat. The transfer for the final treatment is scheduled for Friday. Make sure she signs the last of the papers by then. Your new life is waiting. I sank to the floor, the phone clutched in my hand, my breath coming in ragged, silent gasps. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. The illness, the treatments, the Swiss clinic, it was all a lie. A monstrous, elaborate, and cruel performance designed for one purpose, to strip me of everything I had. They weren't trying to save his life. They were funding a new one, a new life with another woman built on the ashes of mine. The grief was a physical blow, so intense it knocked the air from my lungs, but what followed was something else entirely. It was a cold, pure, and crystalline rage. It was the kind of fury that burns away tears and leaves behind a terrifying clarity. They had preyed on my love, they had weaponized my compassion. They saw me not as a wife, but as a resource to be drained, an obstacle to be discarded. My husband, the man I was nursing, the man whose imminent death I was mourning, was a parasite, and his mother, the grieving matriarch, was his co-conspirator, the architect of my ruin. I looked at him, sleeping peacefully on the sofa, a faint smile on his lips, probably dreaming of his Costa Rican paradise. The love I felt for him was gone, incinerated in the fire of his betrayal. In its place was a void, and in that void a plan began to form. A cold, meticulous, and ruthless plan. He had faked a terminal illness. My revenge would be a diagnosis of a different kind. I would not expose them, not yet. That would be too easy, too merciful. They had played a long game with my heart. I would play a longer one with their future. They thought they were in the final act of their play. They had no idea I was about to rewrite the entire script, and in my version, the villains would not get a happy ending. They wanted to play sick. I would become their plague. The next morning, I woke up a different woman. The grief-stricken, devoted wife had been buried in the rubble of the previous night's discovery. In her place stood a stranger, a woman with ice in her veins and a singular, chilling purpose. I looked at my husband's sleeping face, no longer with love, but with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a specimen. My new role was clear. I had to become the most convincing actress he had ever seen. My performance began at breakfast. I made his favorite pancakes, my hands not shaking in the slightest. I fussed over him, adjusting his pillows, speaking in the soft, gentle tones he had become accustomed to. I looked into his eyes, the same eyes that had lied to me for months, and I projected an image of pure, unconditional love. He lapped it up, completely oblivious. He and his mother were so convinced of their intellectual superiority, so certain of my gullibility that they couldn't conceive of me seeing through their charade. Their arrogance was the stage on which I would build my theater of revenge. My first priority was to secure my position. The house was already on the market, the proceeds of which were meant to be the final cash injection for his new life. I had to stop the sale without raising suspicion. I called our realtor that morning, my voice trembling with practiced emotion. I told her my husband had taken a turn for the worse, that the doctors had advised against the stress of a move, and that we needed to take the house off the market immediately. I made sure to cry a little on the phone for added effect. When my husband found out, I explained that I couldn't bear the thought of him spending his last months in a strange place. "This is our home," I whispered, holding his hand. "I want you to be comfortable here, surrounded by our memories." His initial flash of anger was quickly masked. He couldn't argue with such a loving, selfless sentiment without revealing his true motives. He and his mother exchanged a frustrated look over my head, a silent communication I was now fluent in deciphering. They saw it as a temporary setback, a delay in their payday. They had no idea I had just secured my fortress. Next, I became the director of his illness. Since I was now in control of the narrative, I could make it as elaborate and demanding as I wished. I started researching symptoms of rare, debilitating neurological disorders, the kind that were difficult to disprove and required a host of expensive, specialized equipment. I presented my research to him and his mother with wide-eyed earnestness. "I was reading about a new therapy," I'd say. "It requires a zero-gravity recliner to alleviate spinal pressure. It's expensive, but some patients have seen remarkable results." They had no choice but to agree. The recliner, purchased with a cash advance from his credit card, was just the beginning. I insisted on a hospital-grade adjustable bed, a state-of-the-art air purification system to protect his compromised immune system, and a whole-house water filtration unit. I was systematically bleeding the accounts they controlled, spending their stolen money on props for my stage. My husband was now a prisoner in a gilded cage of my own design. He had to commit to the role of a desperately ill man, which meant spending most of his days in bed looking weak and frail. Any sign of vitality would contradict the story I was now so carefully managing. His mother grew increasingly agitated. "All this equipment seems a bit excessive," she said to me one afternoon, her lips a thin, tight line. I looked at her, my eyes welling with crocodile tears. "Are you saying we should be cutting corners with your son's life?" I asked, my voice cracking. "I'm just trying to give him a fighting chance. I thought you, of all people, would understand." She backed down immediately, her face a mask of false sympathy. She couldn't challenge my devotion without exposing her own monstrous nature. While I played the doting nurse at home, I was a forensic investigator in my spare moments. I hired a private detective, a discreet professional who specialized in financial fraud. I had him track every penny that had been moved from my accounts. He uncovered the shell company his mother had set up to launder the money, the secret bank account in his and his mistress's name, and the down payment they had made on the Costa Rican villa. The detective also got me surveillance photos of my husband on days he was supposedly at a chemo appointment, laughing with his mistress on a beach, looking tanned, muscular, and vibrantly alive. The photos were a gut punch, but they were also my ammunition. They were the irrefutable proof that would be the centerpiece of my final act. Now that I had them trapped, it was time to introduce the bait, the final irresistible lure that would spring the trap. I needed to present them with an opportunity for a score so massive it would make them reckless. I fabricated a story about a life insurance policy I had taken out on him years ago, one I had forgotten about. I found the old paperwork in a box in the attic. The policy, I explained, had a rare and little-known clause, an accelerated death benefit. Upon the confirmed diagnosis of a terminal illness with a prognosis of less than 2 years, the policy would pay out the full amount, a staggering $5 million immediately. I presented the forged documents to them at the dinner table. Their eyes widened, their greed a palpable force in the room. $5 million. It was more than they had ever dreamed of. It was the ultimate jackpot. "This changes everything," his mother said, her voice a reverent whisper. My husband looked at me, a flicker of genuine awe in his eyes. He wasn't in awe of me, but of my apparent ability to unwittingly provide him with yet another windfall. I explained the catch. To process the claim, the insurance company required a final, definitive, in-person medical evaluation conducted by their own board of independent physicians. It was, I explained, an anti-fraud measure. They would need to see his full medical history, and he would need to undergo a physical examination. The irony was so thick I could barely keep from smiling. They didn't hesitate. They saw this as the final hurdle before their glorious, sun-drenched future. The next few weeks were dedicated to preparing him for his final performance. They were the most committed method actors I had ever seen. His mother consulted with a doctor friend of hers, likely the same one who provided the initial fake diagnosis, to get coached on the specific symptoms he needed to exhibit. He began a crash diet to lose a significant amount of weight, making him look gaunt and frail. He used makeup to create dark circles under his eyes and a sickly pallor to his skin. He practiced moving slowly, feigning shortness of breath and dizzy spells. I watched this macabre theater with a cold, detached fascination. I was his director, his coach, and his future executioner, all rolled into one. I encouraged his efforts, telling him how brave he was, how convincing he looked. I made him believe I was his greatest ally in this deception, all the while knowing I was leading him to the slaughter. I handled all the communication with the insurance company, creating a lengthy email chain with a fictional claims agent. I fabricated appointment letters on official-looking letterhead, which I had professionally printed. I set the date for the evaluation. It would take place in a downtown office building in a medical suite I had supposedly booked for the occasion. The day before the evaluation, the three of us sat in the living room. He looked genuinely sick now, a result of his self-imposed starvation. His mother looked at him with a mixture of pride and avarice. "Tomorrow it all pays off," she said, her voice brimming with anticipation. "You just have to be convincing for 1 more hour, then our new life begins." My husband reached for my hand. "I couldn't have gotten through this without you," he said, his voice weak but his eyes bright with greed. "I know this has been hard on you, but I promise you I will make it all up to you." I squeezed his hand, my face a perfect portrait of wifely devotion. "I know you will," I said softly. The trap was set. The actors were in costume and had rehearsed their lines. The stage was ready. Tomorrow was opening night, and the final act would be a masterpiece of cold, calculated justice. The morning of the evaluation dawned bright and clear, a beautiful day for a reckoning. I helped my husband get dressed, his clothes hanging loosely on his deliberately emaciated frame. He was pale, trembling slightly, a combination of weakness from his crashed diet and raw, nervous energy. He was an actor on his opening night, preparing for the role of a lifetime, the role that would win him the $5 million prize. His mother arrived, dressed in a somber but expensive suit, ready to play her part as the concerned, supportive matriarch. She fussed over him, adjusting his collar, her eyes gleaming with a predatory light. They were so close to the finish line they could taste it. I drove them downtown, the silence in the car thick with their anticipation and my own cold, controlled fury. I watched them in the rearview mirror, two vultures ready to feast, completely unaware that the carcass they were circling was their own future. I had rented a high-end boardroom in a prestigious office building, the kind with floor-to-ceiling windows and an imposing mahogany table. The setting was crucial. I wanted them to feel the weight of formality, the chill of corporate power. When we walked in, 3 people were already seated at the far end of the table. A stern-looking man in a tailored suit, a woman with sharp eyes and a leather-bound portfolio, and the private investigator I had hired, a large, impassive man who radiated an aura of no-nonsense authority. My husband faltered at the doorway. "I thought you said it was a panel of doctors," he whispered, his brow furrowed in confusion. "They are," I said smoothly, my voice betraying nothing. "This is the legal and financial advisory team that has to sign off on a payout of this magnitude. Dr. Stevens will be conducting the physical examination in the adjoining room shortly." I had invented Dr. Stevens on the spot. Before they could process this, the man in the suit, my lawyer, stood up. "Please have a seat," he said, his voice a commanding baritone that left no room for argument. We sat down opposite them. My husband and his mother looked unnerved, their cocky assurance beginning to fray at the edges. They had expected a cozy doctor's office, not this intimidating corporate chamber. My lawyer, Mr. Davies, began. "We are here today to discuss the $5 million claim filed against the life insurance policy of this man," he said, gesturing vaguely in my husband's direction. "Before we proceed with the medical assessment, we have a few preliminary due diligence items to review. We call this the veracity audit." He nodded to the woman beside him, a forensic accountant. She opened her portfolio and, without a word, turned on the large monitor on the wall. The first image that appeared was a bank statement, my husband's secret account held jointly with his mistress. The accountant used a laser pointer to highlight the incoming transfers from my liquidated savings and the outgoing payments for lavish dinners, expensive jewelry, and international flights. A strangled gasp escaped my mother-in-law's throat. My husband stared at the screen, his face turning the color of ash. The next slide appeared. It was a copy of the Articles of Incorporation for the shell company his mother had established. Her name was clearly visible as the sole director. "This entity," Mr. Davies said, his voice dripping with ice, "was the primary vehicle used to defraud my client of her life savings, a sum totaling $1,472,000. The forensic accountant brought up a new slide, a detailed flowchart mapping the entire financial conspiracy, from my retirement accounts to their offshore dreams. It was a masterpiece of financial detective work, a damning, undeniable blueprint of their greed. Then came the final presentation. The private investigator spoke for the first time, his voice a low rumble. "While my husband was allegedly undergoing debilitating cancer treatments in Switzerland," he began, and the monitor flashed with a series of high-resolution photographs. My husband on a beach in the Caribbean, his arm around his mistress, both of them tanned and laughing. My husband riding a jet ski, his body strong and vital. My husband and his mistress looking at floor plans for their Costa Rican villa, the one purchased with my money. My mother-in-law let out a small, wounded cry. My husband simply stared, his mouth agape, his carefully constructed world shattering before his eyes. The room was silent for a long moment, then I spoke. "The performance is over," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of a death sentence. "There is no insurance policy, there is no $5 million, there is only your fraud, your betrayal, and your consequences." I stood up and walked to the head of the table, feeling a sense of power I had never known. "You preyed on my love. You used my compassion as a weapon against me. You left me for dead emotionally and financially. You faked a terminal illness, but the real sickness, the true cancer, was your greed." Mr. Davies slid a thick stack of papers across the table toward them. "This is a confession," he explained. "You will sign it, admitting to conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, and theft. You," he said, looking at my husband, "will agree to an immediate and uncontested divorce, ceding all rights to any marital assets, not that there are any left for you. You will also sign this restraining order prohibiting you from ever contacting me again." He turned to my mother-in-law. "And you will sign a document legally transferring the deed of your own home to my client as partial restitution for the funds you helped steal. It's not nearly enough, but it's a start." They stared at the papers, dumbfounded. "And if we don't," my husband croaked, his voice a hoarse whisper. Mr. Davies smiled, a chilling, razor-thin expression. "Then this entire file," he said, tapping the folder in front of him, "goes directly to the district attorney's office. The evidence is overwhelming. You will both be charged with multiple felonies. Given the premeditated and cruel nature of your crimes, you will likely serve the maximum sentence. We're talking years in prison, your choice." While they sat there, paralyzed by the collapse of their world, I delivered the final blow. "By the way," I said, pulling out my phone, "my lawyer also filed a civil suit this morning against your mistress. We are suing her to recover every asset purchased with my stolen money, the villa, the car, the jewelry, everything. She was served with the papers about an hour ago. I imagine your new life together is having a rather difficult start." I could picture the scene, the process server at the door, the confusion, the dawning realization on her face that the man she'd pinned her future on was not a wealthy benefactor, but a common thief. His meticulously built paradise was burning down, and I had lit the match. He finally broke, slumping forward in his chair, his head in his hands, making a wretched, sobbing sound. His mother just stared into space, her face a blank mask of utter ruin. They had nothing. No money, no future, and no way out. They picked up the pens, and with trembling hands they signed away the last vestiges of their lives. I didn't stay to watch. I simply turned, walked out of that boardroom, and didn't look back. I stepped out of the building into the bright sunlight, taking a deep, clean breath for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The cancer had been cut out. The revenge wasn't loud or explosive. It was a quiet, clinical, and complete eradication. It was colder and more final than any medical diagnosis. I had lost my money, my husband, and the life I thought I had, but in their place I had found a strength I never knew I possessed. I was a survivor, and my new life was just beginning. Thanks listening this story. Now I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. Share this story with your friends, and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to Revenge Laura for more episodes.